So playing Ratz, I've received a lot of questions from players asking about tips and hints about getting better at Ratz Instagib, and so I've decided to make this video, which hopefully will allow everyone to up their game. So the first thing you're going to want to look at is the configuration that you have, and particularly the gameplay enemy model color. You want to choose a color that has a really high contrast, and because of that, the best thing to do is to just simply choose the auto contrast color and set that to on. So the other thing you want to take a look at is the frag types. Frag types can be pretty darn distracting. They can go all over your screen and significantly reduce your visibility. So for that reason, choose the frag type that seems the least distracting to you. And similarly so, go look at the beam types and choose one that seems like it's distracting the least so you can see stuff as you shoot. And given those settings, you also want to force the frag type on, and you want to force the beam type on as well, so that regardless of who's shooting, those beam types are going to be applied not just to you but also to your enemies. The next thing to look at is your field of view, and to do that I'll just position myself differently here. Your field of view dictates how much you can see around you, so this has an effect in terms of which you can see and which you can detect. And mine is currently set to 110, and here's an example of 120, which is another common configuration. And as you set it to 120, you can see more to the side, and that has the effect of making it more of a tunnel vision where things that are far are smaller, or appear smaller anyhow. In Ratz at least we can go all the way to 160. However, going to 160 creates a very severe tunnel effect. You can see a lot around you, but it makes it really hard to aim for anything because things seem very far away. This is somewhat the opposite of scoping in most other games. And at the other extreme we can set it to 30, which is more or less your equivalent of scoping or zooming in really close. In this case you see very little around you. It's easy to shoot people that are far away. However, Ratz tends to be so fast paced that I personally don't use any zooming, and in fact my secondary zoom field of view is set to 160 so that I can easily see everything that's around me by just hitting a button. As for the show weapon model, it's always best to keep that off. It simply obstructs your view. It's really not useful. The crosshair style should be a personal preference, so please use what makes sense there. The other thing you can change is the beam decal. The idea behind that setting is that you can have the walls or whatever you hit reflect the fact that you hit it by putting a decal on it. This is more of a personal taste thing. I personally think that it's distracting. It adds a bunch of color all around, and I prefer to just toggle it off instead. The next one is the boost range indicator. That one basically puts a circle where the bigger the circle is, the closer you are to the ground, and it gives you a sense for Rel jumping in terms of when you can start to hit it. I personally find it rather distracting, so I do not use it. Because of that, I arguably miss a couple of shots, but it's something to just get used to, and it's not that bad. The next one that I have is the hit indicator, and that I just leave on. I like to know when I hit people. And full bright Ratz is the next setting. For that one, I'm not a fan of that. However, the other piece that I do like to put is the outline on the Ratz, so you can choose how the Ratz are outlined, and to make them more visible, black is usually a great choice. The other piece that I'm playing with right now are the map saturations. I don't tend to like a very highly saturated map, so instead I tend to stick it to half and half, and it makes it a little more manageable for me. The other typical FPS things to do, of course, here is to disable VSync. Anti-aliasing for this game, really not that impactful, so it's okay to leave it on. The extra bloom, I'm not a fan of that as well. The world outline does make the world look a little nicer. You know where the edges are. It's a little bit more clean in some areas, so I do tend to like that on. And the model shadows, of course, is on so that you can see when someone's over your head. it does become really useful. Vignetting is really more of a stylistic approach. It doesn't help or make your game any harder, so there's really more of a stylistic aspect of things. The FPS, however, you should try to match that to your screen resolution, to your screen refresh rate, whether that's 60, 120, 140, or anything weird in the middle. Other than that, I think it's mainly up to your own setting. The mouse sensitivity perhaps is the only one that might be contentious. I tend to like a rather high sensitivity mouse. For my case, I move about 1 inch to make a 180. So this motion right here is about 1 inch of movement. And again, it depends on your driver settings and your DPI on your mouse and a bunch of other things like that. So again, very personal preference set of kind of stuff, but for Ratz especially, you're generally better with a higher sensitivity because Ratz is a really high-paced, fast action game versus the CSGO kind of stuff. And that's about it for the configuration aspect of the game. It has different varying speeds, and here's the example of a speed by just walking straight forward. And here's an example of jumping while moving forward. So there's a slight difference here. While I jump, I actually move faster than I do if I were to simply walk. Other technique that you can use to move faster is the Rel Jump. So you can look down and propel yourself forward. The Rel Jump is significantly faster than either jumping or moving straight forward. And this is the common way that a lot of players will Rel Jump around. You'll see them move forward, look down, rocket themselves back up, and propel themselves forward. And again, this is a pretty relatively efficient way to move forward. It adds a bit of height so that you're not just working mode in a 2D plane. It makes you a little harder to hit. The other nice thing about it is that the rat can actually bounce off the ground at different heights, meaning that a player can, for example, hit the ground and bounce up, or a player can actually bounce up a lot sooner than before they hit the ground. So that makes you a little less predictable again, because you can end up in situations where you never really do hit the ground. So in terms of speed, here is the comparable moving forward. Again, it's much faster than the alternative that we've seen so far. However, you can actually move a lot faster than that. And the idea behind Ratz is that your rail propels you in the opposite direction of where your rail hits. So as a simple example, I'm going to sit here and shoot the ground with a slight angle, and I'm actually not touching the arrows here. I am not moving forward, I am moving purely with the Rel Jump. And it's just pushing me backwards, just like that. However, the much more efficient way to do this is to push the arrows backwards while you're thrusting yourself in the opposite direction. So in this case, it actually takes 2 to 3 hits to do the entire map, and it moves significantly faster than if I were to just either Rel Jump on my own and go really high, or pushing only with the Rel Jump. What you do in this situation is you want a 180, shoot behind you, and flick 180 back and use the arrows to propel yourself forward. Just like that. And as you get better at it, you can flick really quickly, and then you can move extremely quickly around the map with a +2 flick, which is again a lot more efficient than you would otherwise be able to. Some people like to shoot from sideways, and that doesn't quite give you the same speed as you would if you were to 180 flick and go the other way. And keep in mind that when you do this, the best way to get speed is to minimize the height that you jump through. In other words, use all of your speed by going forward and not by going up high. So use the walls to propel yourself forward, so you're not limited to only hitting the ground. As an example, here's a hit using the ground. And right here, here's an example of using the wall. So we jump high, and then we can use the wall. And in fact, we can get around the entire room without even touching the floor. And of course, you're not just limited to walls and floors. You can also look at hitting random objects, such as the rats right here, or the box. So pretty much anything around the map you can use to bounce off. There are a couple of glitches on some maps, so you gotta be careful, but generally speaking, you can bounce off just about anything. So the strategy that a lot of the new players use is they just sit in a corner, camp, and shoot at people, just like that. That's a pretty bad strategy. As soon as someone comes around, they are completely toast. Not just that, but if the fight happens in the other corner of the room, they have absolutely no say in terms of killing people, while they could be coming in and killing a lot of people. Play a death match. The strategy you employ in terms of how you want to attack will differ depending on what your opponent is and the skill level. For example, if your opponents are not so great at movement, you can actually move around very easily on top of things and shoot at them and bounce all over the place. So moving in 3D again is going to be a lot harder for them to hit than if you were just in a 2D plane. The one thing you want to be careful about, however, is that flying up high will make you an easier target to hit for a lot of the better players. Primarily because the gravity is very wonky in this game. As an example, if I go all the way up to the top, you'll see how slow and sluggish it is for me to go all the way to the bottom. And that makes you an extremely easy target because your movement is very predictable. And in fact, for that period of time, you may as well just pretty much be on the ground. It's slightly harder to hit, but marginally. So one technique you can use is to basically just kick off the roof, just like I did here. So kick off the roof and get back down. And there's a lot of obstacles in general where you can kick yourself back down. The other technique you can use to propel yourself down is to basically use the rail on the wall to push you down. So it moves you down at a slightly faster speed than you would otherwise be able to, and again makes you a little less predictable. Up and down and in all directions is really good for Team Arena when you're dealing with lesser players, but when you're dealing with really top players that have aims between 30 and 50, historically from Quake 3, basically most of the wars end up happening behind small containers such as here. So there would be, for example, I'd be sitting here and having a war with someone that's basically on the other side, and he would have his vision just right there with my crosshair on me, and as soon as I peep out, he would have a straight shot at me. So the one way I would have to get out of this situation here would be to surprise him. So I'd go up here, for example, and shoot him up there. The other strategy that's useful is to bounce off the wall really quickly and shoot him on the other side. Since he expects me to basically just stick behind that and try to shoot him from this position, if I move really quickly outside of this position, I can end up getting out of this hole and shooting him at the same time. The other thing that's pretty common from duels especially is that if you go up really high, you end up being a very easy target, so you do want to make sure that your jumps are as close to the ground as possible. That'll again allow you to move really fast without exposing yourself too much. not as much about positioning, but there are cases where it is useful. For example, in this corridor, if I were to bolt through it, I'd be a pretty easy target because this whole thing is pretty narrow, straight, and I'm coming straight at him. So this makes me a pretty easy prey if I'm to come over and Rel Jump all the way down here. So like this. It makes me a pretty easy target. Even worse on this other side, as it's even more narrow. A generally better way to cross this place is to go either under here or up here, and that gives me a chance to make, again, be less predictable. And at the same time, we can jump off the blocks, making it go down even faster than we normally might be able to go. And also changing our direction mid-course, which again would make us a lot harder to hit. There are pretty dangerous camping spots on a lot of the maps. For example, here, this is a spot where you can hit a lot of things, and you're somewhat protected by that door on the side. So these are areas where a lot of common players will just camp out, and it will make it a lot harder for people to besiege them. So coming at an angle such as this makes it a little harder